There is a moment that almost nobody talks about, not because it's rare, because it's so ordinary that it disappears into the background of daily life. You're sitting in a chair, maybe at the kitchen table, with the last of your morning coffee still warm in the cup. Maybe in your living room, the television on low in the background. Maybe visiting friends, talking about something you've talked about 100 times before. And then the conversation ends. You place your hands on the armrests, lean forward, and stand up. At least that's what you're trying to do. Because somewhere between sitting and standing, something has changed. Not dramatically, not enough to alarm anyone else in the room, but enough for you to notice. Enough for a quiet thought to appear and leave so quickly that most people never say it out loud. That took more effort than it used to. His name is Robert. He was 68 when it happened. A retired contractor from the Pacific Northwest. The kind of man who spent most of his life building things with his hands. For 40 years, he climbed ladders without thinking, carried lumber across job sites in the early morning cold, loaded trucks, moved furniture, solved problems with his body before his mind had finished forming the question. If something needed to be done, Robert did it. That was simply who he was. And then, one afternoon, the radio on low, the smell of sawdust still faint in his workshop clothes, he pushed himself up from his favorite chair and felt something unfamiliar. Not pain, not injury, hesitation. For a fraction of a second, his body seemed to negotiate with him. He stood. The moment passed. The day continued. But the thought stayed. Robert adjusted quietly, the way most people do. Sat in higher chairs when he could. Used his hands a little more than before. Moved a little slower on certain mornings. Nothing dramatic. Nothing worth mentioning to anyone. He told himself it was simply age. Simply what happens. And for almost a year, that explanation was enough. But here's something I've learned after 24 years working with adults over 50. The moments that change a life rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary inconveniences: a staircase, a chair, a curb, a grocery bag that feels heavier than it should. Small things, everyday things, things that seem too insignificant to matter, until one day you realize they were trying to tell you something. Nobody worries about a staircase until the day they stop halfway. And nobody worries about a chair until the day standing up requires planning. That is the moment the question arrives, quiet, uninvited. Is this just what happens now? I asked Robert that question directly, about a year after that first afternoon. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I've never forgotten. I thought it was, until I found out it wasn't. Standing up from a chair is not just a movement. It's a conversation. And once you understand what that conversation is actually saying, you start seeing much more than a chair. You start seeing the years ahead of you differently. Stay with me. Because what that chair is measuring may be the most important thing nobody ever told you to pay attention to. There is a test that predicts more about your future than most people realize. It doesn't require a hospital. It doesn't require a scan. It doesn't require blood work or a referral or a waiting room. In fact, you've probably performed this test several times today without knowing it. The question is whether you've been paying attention to the result. The test begins with a chair, not a special chair, not a piece of exercise equipment, just a chair. The kind sitting in your kitchen right now. Here's what I want you to imagine. You sit down, you relax for a few minutes, and then someone asks you to stand up. Nothing unusual, nothing difficult. Just stand. Now imagine doing it without using your hands. Not quickly, not athletically, just smoothly, without thinking, without preparation, without negotiation. Most people assume that movement is measuring one thing, leg strength, but it isn't. Not really. Because standing up from a chair may be one of the most quietly revealing movements in daily life. And what it reveals has very little to do with how strong you are. Robert didn't know that. At 69, he still thought the chair was simply becoming less comfortable. That's what he told himself. Until one Sunday afternoon, his daughter visiting, his grandson running between rooms, the smell of something warm coming from the kitchen, when the conversation ended and everyone stood up from the table. His grandson first, then his daughter, then his wife. And Robert noticed something he had never needed to notice before. Everybody else stood. He climbed. He used the table edge, shifted his weight carefully, found his footing. And by the time he was upright, the moment had already moved on without him. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. But Robert felt it. Once he noticed it, he couldn't stop noticing it. Not just in his own kitchen, in restaurants, at church, at his grandson's school events. Every chair became a quiet reminder of something he couldn't quite name yet. Because standing up from a chair isn't just a movement. It reflects things most people never think to connect to it. Balance. The nervous system's quiet confidence in the body it's navigating. Reserve. The difference between what your body can do and what daily life actually demands of it. And something deeper still. Your relationship with the future, not the distant future. The one that arrives next Sunday, next Thanksgiving. The morning your grandchild asks you to come outside. What Robert discovered next, slowly, and then all at once, is something I believe every adult over 50 deserves to understand. Not because it's alarming, but because understanding it changes what's still possible. Let me tell you what the research actually says, not to alarm you, but because I've found that when people understand what's happening inside their body, really understand it, something shifts, the fear becomes smaller, and the path forward becomes clearer. There's a study that has stayed with me for years, published in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology. Researchers followed more than 2,000 adults over a decade. They asked each person to perform one simple task: sit on the floor, then stand back up, without using their hands if possible, without using their knees for support if possible. Just stand. They scored each person on a scale from 0 to 10. And then they waited. What they found was quiet and significant. The people who scored the lowest, who needed the most support to stand, were more than 5 times as likely to die within the next 6 years than those who scored the highest. 5 times. Not from falls. Not directly from the movement itself. But because the ability to rise from the floor, or from a chair, reflects something fundamental about the body's overall condition. Muscle strength. Balance integration. Flexibility. Coordination. The quiet conversation happening between your brain and your body every single moment. Now, I want to be careful here, because a statistic is not a sentence, and a study is not your story. What the research is telling us is not that the chair is dangerous, it's that the chair is honest, it reflects where you are, and more importantly, it shows you where you can still go. Robert heard about this study from me. We were sitting in my office, him in the chair across from my desk, me watching him settle into it the way I'd learned to watch people settle into chairs. He listened to the numbers quietly. Then he said, "So the chair was trying to tell me something." "Yes, Robert. That's exactly what it was doing." Here is what I see after 24 years of practice. Most people lose the ability to stand easily from a chair, not because their legs became weak overnight. It happens gradually, quietly. Over months and years of sitting more, moving less, choosing the elevator, parking closer, avoiding the stairs, not because they can't manage them, but because they've learned to be cautious. And caution, over time, teaches the body to expect less of itself. There is a word for this process: deconditioning. It sounds clinical, but what it really means is this. The body is extraordinarily good at becoming exactly what you ask of it. If you ask it to sit, it learns to sit. If you ask it to move, it learns to move. If you ask it to rise without help, again and again, day after day, it learns to rise. The body doesn't distinguish between giving up and resting. It simply responds to what you consistently do. Robert understood this slowly, not from the study alone, from his own kitchen, from his own chair, from the quiet accumulation of small moments that finally added up to something he could no longer ignore. And once he understood what was actually happening, not aging as inevitability, but deconditioning as a process, something changed in the way he saw the months ahead of him. The chair stopped being a verdict and started being a starting point. I want to talk about something that rarely gets discussed in conversations about mobility and aging. Not muscle, not balance, something quieter than both. Confidence. There is a particular kind of confidence that lives in the body. Not the confidence of achievement, not the confidence of knowing you're right about something. The confidence of trusting that your body will do what you ask of it. That when you step off a curb, your ankle will respond. That when you reach for something on a high shelf, your balance will hold. That when you stand up from a chair, you will simply stand. Most people don't notice this confidence when it's present. It operates invisibly, the way good health always does. But when it begins to fade, you notice? Robert noticed it in small ways first. He started scanning rooms for chairs with armrests, not consciously, just preferring them. He began sitting closer to the edge of sofas at other people's homes, positioning himself for an easier exit before the conversation even began. He stopped sitting on the floor with his grandson, not because he couldn't get down, because he wasn't sure he could get back up, and he didn't want to find out in front of anyone. That last one, the floor, that was the one that stayed with him. His grandson was 7, the age when everything happens on the floor, Lego pieces spread across the carpet, board games that require you to lean in close, moments that only exist if you're willing to get down there. Robert was watching those moments from the couch. These are the adaptations that happen in silence, invisible to everyone else, perfectly visible to the person making them, and they matter not just because of what they prevent, but because of what they quietly cost. Every adaptation is a small withdrawal from life. A dinner party you attend, but don't fully inhabit. A grandchild's game you watch from the sidelines. A moment you let pass because your body and your confidence weren't quite aligned. Here is what I want you to understand about confidence and the body. The nervous system learns fear the same way it learns everything else. Through repetition. Every time you avoid a movement because you're uncertain, every time you reach for support before you need it, every time you choose the longer route around the stairs, the nervous system takes note. It files that information carefully, and the next time that situation arrives, it offers you the same solution it offered before: caution, hesitation, the quiet suggestion that perhaps you shouldn't try. This is not weakness. This is the body doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting you based on the most recent information it has. The problem is that the most recent information is incomplete because the body doesn't know what it's still capable of. It only knows what it's been asked to do lately. And that is perhaps the most important thing I can tell you today. What your body has stopped doing is not the same as what your body can no longer do. Those are two very different things. And the distance between them, that gap, is where everything that still matters lives. Robert told me something during one of our early conversations that I've shared with patients many times since. He said, "I didn't realize I was making myself smaller. I thought I was being careful. Being careful and making yourself smaller can look identical from the outside. The difference is only visible from the inside, and only if you're paying attention." Let me tell you something that took me years to understand, and that Robert understood in about 30 seconds. The body doesn't forget how to move. It forgets that it's supposed to. Those are two very different things. When Robert was working, really working the way he worked for 40 years, His body moved without asking permission. He climbed a ladder, and his legs simply carried him. He lifted something heavy, and everything that needed to fire, fired. Not because he was exceptional, because he was asking. Every single day, without thinking about it, he was asking his body for something, and the body answered. Then he retired, and the asking slowed down, not all at once, gradually, the way a conversation slows down when two people stop having much to say to each other, a little less one week, a little less the month after, until one day, Robert pushed himself up from his favorite chair, and his body hesitated, not because it had forgotten how to stand, because it had stopped expecting to be asked. I explained this to Robert once, using an image that seemed to help him. I said, imagine the muscles responsible for lifting you out of a chair are like workers who've been told to wait. They're still there. They haven't gone anywhere, but they've been waiting so long without being called that they've stopped paying attention. When you finally call them, they're slow to respond. Other muscles try to cover for them, muscles that weren't built for that job, and the whole operation becomes harder than it needs to be. Robert looked at me and said, so they're not gone. They're just not listening anymore. Exactly. They're not gone. They're just not listening anymore. And here is the part that matters most. They can learn to listen again. The body is not a machine that breaks down. It is more like a relationship. It responds to attention. It responds to being asked. It responds to the consistent daily signal that says, I still need you. We still do this together. When Robert started standing up from his kitchen chair 5 times every morning, without his hands, slowly, deliberately, he wasn't just exercising. He was reopening a conversation that had gone quiet. He was calling the workers back, and they came. Not immediately, not dramatically, but they came. By the end of the second week, something had shifted. Not in his strength, in his expectation. He started standing up from chairs without thinking about it first, not all the time, not perfectly, but sometimes. And sometimes, after a year of hesitation, felt like everything. The science behind all of this is real and well documented. But Robert didn't need the science, he needed the image, workers who had stopped listening. A conversation that had gone quiet. A body that was waiting to be asked again. That's all any of this is, not a decline, not an ending. A conversation that got interrupted, and that you can choose, any morning, starting tomorrow, to continue. I want to talk about what's actually possible, not in the language of fitness programs, not in the language of transformation, in the language of ordinary life, the life you want to keep living, because the goal was never to perform, the goal was always to participate. There is a particular kind of freedom that comes from a body you trust, not a perfect body, not a young body, a body that responds when you ask something of it, that carries you up the stairs without requiring your full attention, that lets you sit on the floor with a grandchild and get back up without planning the exit before you've even sat down. That walks through an airport, navigates a parking lot, manages a grocery store without the quiet background calculation of risk that exhausts people far more than the movement itself. That freedom is not gone. For most people watching, it is not gone. It has simply been asked for less and less. And what we ask for less, the body quietly stops offering. I asked Robert to begin with something surprisingly simple, 5 slow stands from his kitchen chair each morning. No rush, no stopwatch, no equipment, just standing up and sitting back down. With intention. We focused on using the legs instead of the hands. We focused on control instead of speed, especially on the way down. Because the body learns more from the careful lowering than from the effort of getting up. That's it. No gym, no program, no before and after. Just a man and a chair and 5 quiet minutes before the coffee was ready. The chair that felt like the problem became the tool. Robert told me later that the first few mornings, his legs were shaking by the 3rd repetition, not from pain, from effort, from muscles being called back to a conversation they hadn't been part of in a long time. By the end of the second week, The shaking was gone. He didn't tell me because he was proud. He told me because he was surprised. "I didn't think it would happen that fast," he said. "It wasn't fast. It was consistent. Those are different things. Fast is dramatic. Consistent is quiet. And quiet is what actually works. The body responds to being asked, not to being pushed, not to being punished. Asked, gently, repeatedly, with the same patience you'd offer someone learning something for the first time, which, in a way, is exactly what this is. Not relearning, reminding. The body already knows how to do this. It just needs to be reminded that you still expect it to. 3 weeks after Robert started, something happened at Sunday dinner. His grandson stood, his daughter stood, his wife stood, and Robert stood, not quickly, not effortlessly, but without the table edge, without the careful repositioning, without the moment passing before he'd caught up to it. He simply stood. And the conversation continued. He mentioned it to me at our next appointment. Quietly, the way he mentioned most things. I stood up with everyone else. 6 words. But I understood exactly what they meant. Because I remembered the Sunday he described months earlier. Everybody else stood. He climbed. The distance between those 2 moments, between climbing and standing, was 5 repetitions every morning. No hands. Slow on the way down. Before the coffee. That is what's possible. Not performance. Participation. Not perfection. Presence. If you're still here with me, thank you. It means you're still willing to stay curious. And curiosity about your own body, about what's still possible, matters more than most people realize. Now let me tell you the part of Robert's story I haven't told you yet. About 8 months after he started with the kitchen chair, 5 quiet minutes every morning before anyone else in the house was awake, something happened that had nothing to do with a chair. He went back to his workshop, not to work, just to be there. He'd been avoiding it. The stairs down to the basement had started to feel uncertain. The concrete floor felt less forgiving than it used to. He told himself he was too busy, but the truth was simpler than that. He wasn't sure he trusted himself in that space anymore. The workshop had been his place for 40 years. The place where he was most himself. Not Robert the husband. Not Robert the grandfather. Just Robert. The man who built things with his hands. Who solved problems in wood and metal before most people had finished thinking about them. Who measured twice and cut once and never wasted a piece of good lumber. And somewhere along the way, without deciding to, without even noticing, he had stopped going there. That afternoon, he went down the stairs. He walked the length of the workshop slowly. He stood at his workbench and ran his hand along the edge of a project he'd left unfinished 14 months earlier. A cabinet for his daughter's kitchen. He'd stopped working on it around the same time he'd started noticing the chair. He hadn't connected those 2 things until that moment. He didn't finish the cabinet that day, but he picked up where he'd left off. He measured. He adjusted. He worked. And 3 weeks later, he delivered it. His daughter cried. She didn't know about the chair. She didn't know about the workshop. She didn't know about the 14 months. She just knew her father had made her something with his hands, the way he always had, the way she had always known him to do. What moved me when Robert told me this story wasn't the cabinet. It was the stairs. The stairs he wasn't sure he could trust. The stairs he went down anyway. Because somewhere in 8 months of 5 quiet repetitions, his legs had learned something his mind hadn't quite caught up to yet. That he could still be trusted, that the workshop was still his, that the man who built things with his hands was still there, waiting, not gone, just waiting to be called back. The chair was never really about the chair. It was about the workshop. It was about the Sunday dinners. It was about the floor where a 7-year-old spreads Lego pieces and looks up expecting you to be there. It was about every place and every moment and every version of yourself that you thought you might be slowly losing access to. That is what the chair was measuring all along. Not strength, not age, not decline. The distance between who you are and who you still have the right to be. I don't think Robert remembers the chair anymore. Not really. I think he remembers the cabinet, the workshop, the afternoon his daughter cried. That's what happens when the body finds its way back. You stop thinking about the body, and you start thinking about your life again. That is the quiet miracle of all of this, not the movement itself. What the movement returns you to. There are places in your life that are waiting for you. Not dramatically, not urgently, just waiting. The way places wait for the people who belong in them. A workshop, a garden, a kitchen where something is always being made. A trail you used to walk on Sunday mornings before. Sunday mornings became something to manage. A grandchild's bedroom floor. A seat at the table, not on the edge, not positioned for an easy exit, but fully, completely at the table. Those places haven't gone anywhere. They are exactly where you left them. The question the chair was asking all along, the question Robert finally heard, was never about standing. It was about returning. Can you still get to the places that matter? Are you still willing to ask your body to take you there? Is the conversation still happening? For Robert, the answer was yes. Not because he was exceptional, not because he was disciplined in ways most people aren't, but because one morning, quietly, without ceremony, he decided to ask. 5 times before the coffee. And the body, which had been waiting to be asked, answered. The workshop was always there. He just needed to trust the stairs. Your places are still there too. Whatever they are, wherever they are, whoever is in them. The goal was never the chair. The goal was always to return to the places that matter, and returning is still possible. For most people watching, it is still possible. That is what I want you to carry with you when this video ends. Not a technique, not a protocol, not a number of repetitions. Just this. The places that matter are still there, and so are you. If something in this conversation stayed with you, if something here named what you've been feeling, I'd ask 2 things. Subscribe. We're here every day. Honest conversations about the body, about aging, about the places you still want to reach. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who might be adjusting quietly. Someone who might have stopped going to their workshop. I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell. The places are still there. I'll see you tomorrow.